should all get the notification that we're recording.
Right.
Okay, welcome to the September meeting of the New York chapter of Mystery Writers of America. First, can you all hear me?
Yep.
Yes.
I'm admitting more. I'll be doing that, I guess, for the next few minutes. My name is Gary Earl Ross, and I am program chair of the New York chapter. And that is probably until we go back to any kind of live meetings, since I live 427 miles away. I won't be commuting to those. But we've been doing an awful lot over the last couple of years with discussions and guest speakers and author spotlights for members. And so we're going to continue that at least in the new year. And still admitting. Okay, today's topic for Crime Craft, which is designed to be a freewheeling discussion. The next one we do in November will be on sleuthing and sleuths. But today's topic is crime in the city. Now, as I mentioned in my email invitation to the meeting, I know there used to be a joke. It circled around on several late night shows and so forth that Cabot Cove, Maine had the highest per capita murder rate in the United States. That said, the idea of the small town, and I thought about that. I have a mother-in-law who is 94 and is in the throes of dementia. And when I'm with her, I have been the last couple years as she's gone down and Tammy would go away, and so I'd spend a lot of time with her. I've been watching with her Columbo reruns because they engage her. And we've gone through all of Columbo, and now we're doing Murder, She Wrote. So Kevin, kind of in my mind, but those things engage her, and that's fine. But what about cities? Akashic Press has been doing for the last number of years anthologies, noir anthologies with various cities, Boston, Brooklyn, New York. We even had a Buffalo noir, which I was happy to be a part of. And cities, I think, are special places. I'm admitting all of you. Cities, I think, are special places when it comes to crime stories.
That's right.
I showed Salesforce and how it works. They like it better, so they're using my CRM.
Hello? Okay, you can feel free to connect to audio for the general discussion, but if you have other stuff going on, please mute your audio so that it won't come through. So, what is it about cities that makes the city itself a suitable place? Is it population density? Because we have so many more possible victims. If you read Dracula, you understand that Dracula is kind of a crime novel in the sense that the reason Dracula wants to come to London is that the population at that point is probably 3 or 4 million. And, you know, when you've eaten everything on the buffet in your little Transylvanian village, you want to go to the outback, someplace where you have more choice. So what is it that makes cities worthwhile? Organizations. And I don't necessarily mean just, say, organized crime, which, you know, it's kind of hard. I think there's a reality show called Amish Mafia, which I've never watched. But I think organized crime doesn't do quite the same thing in the country that it might in a city. Is it other organizations like businesses where we have chances for corruption? My city, Buffalo, which is sort of a mid-sized city, population of the city somewhere around 260,000 population of the surrounding county, which is essentially called Metro Buffalo. Not quite a million, about 940 or 50,000. What is it that makes that work? Yes, Roberta,
Can you hear me?
I can.
Okay. I think it's the diversity, because cities are basically a group of neighborhoods. My current work is kind of a hybrid of mystery set in a city, in a science fiction setting on another planet, settled by humans, but with a different environment.
Okay.
I think that a city has a very varied population, and you can, as an author, you can take various types and put them in there, and it does have to have a certain organization. From a historical point of view, the very earliest cities in Sumer, we actually have a clay tablet which has a description of a local, I guess it would be an altercation in the marketplace between two vendors that come to blows, and a member of the local guards or whatever has to settle the matter. So you get that kind of thing. The more people you have, the more opportunity there is for interaction.
Crime, the more opportunity for conflict and crime. And I'm glad you mentioned Sumer, one of my favorite books from college. History begins at Sumer.
But even as soon as you had cities, as soon as you have a whole lot of people together, you have to have some kind of regulation or organization, because you have a lot of people with different motives, with different with
different needs.
Agendas.
Well, that works.
And sometimes you have clashes of cultures. So this is a great opportunity for the writer to get in, and it's conflict, and it's drama, and it's crime.
Okay, Thomas?
Yeah, when you really think about it, it's people that cause crime. And whether you believe it or not, go back to the early pages of the Bible. Where was the first murder? Cain and Abel. Wherever there are people, there are problems. And it's funny that my wife and I both watch mysteries, and you mentioned Cabot Cove, but there's also a show called Death in Paradise, which some of you may have seen, where I wouldn't want to go there on a vacation because somebody gets killed there every week. So one of the things I've done in my mystery novels is every novel is set in a different place. So whether it's San Antonio or the Bayou or my latest book on Ireland, you know, conflict occurs everywhere in this society, unfortunately.
In all societies. And you're absolutely right. And I think my novels, my mystery novels, at least my series, primarily take place in Buffalo. I mean, my character gets to go to other places, but comes back because Buffalo is called the Nickel City. So it's the Nickel City series. But there are things that are maybe manageable when you know a city well and you can represent it. And then other cities may be beyond your depth for doing something. I've set stories in New York City because I visit New York City a fair amount, and I really like New York City. I can't afford to live there on an but I very much like New York City. This summer, Tammy and I went to London for the first time in 30 years. I have never seen so many people clustered together in the same place. And this, now my son went to Polytech. I used to drive him back and forth to Brooklyn all the time. I have never seen so many people in one place. And it's like, this is horrifying. Much as I love London and much as I had fun, it's like, my God, there's so many people. And I twisted my foot jumping back from a curb because, of course, in the United States, when you step off a curb, you first look left. There, you're supposed to first look right. And I looked left and then looked right almost too late. And so I'm limping around and I'm thinking, all these people, and I can't keep up. so I think the city, that would be a city where I would love to set something. And, you know, I spent, 8 days, 10 days. First time I was there was 10 days. This time I was there 5 days in London and then 4 days in the countryside. And I think I could do something there. Got a lot of information, a lot of pictures and so forth. But oh my God, the crush. And
I'm curious.
yes.
How many of people think you actually have to go to a place? Obviously, I cannot very well go to the city of lore because it only exists in my mind, but I have a map that I drew up that shows me where everything is. And I have been to London because I said a story there, and of course I grew up in New York City, so I know it very well. But do you think it's really necessary to actually go to the place and walk around?
That's an interesting question, and I'll let others answer before I toss out a thought on it. Charles?
I think you need a good depth of knowledge about the location that you're writing about. My stories are set in Philadelphia in the 70s and 80s, and guess what? I'm still in Philadelphia, so, and I have a great depth of knowledge. I tried to have my detective go to Wildwood, New Jersey, and I was lost because I haven't been to Wildwood myself in like 30 years. So I think you need a good depth of knowledge, if not for anything else, just for one thing. Because one time I read a story by a Philadelphia writer about Philadelphia, and she had people driving down the wrong way on a one-way street.
Oh, yeah.
And that just wiped out all her credibility. And I said, no, I'm done with this. So I think you need that good depth of knowledge about a city. Now, how you gain that depth of knowledge, whether you draw it from your imagination or, boots on the ground, that's up to you. But yeah, I think you need some good, solid experiences where you're writing about.
Okay, excellent point. Must you go? Okay, Maggie? You're muted.
I was born and raised in the Bronx. And lived in the suburbs to raise a family and so forth, but we did move back to the city. And so I lived in the city many, many years, still do. At the moment, I'm at Fantasy Island, which is Cape Cod, Massachusetts, with my daughter. But I mean, I grew up in New York City. I went to the schools in New York City. I have obviously a lot of memories of New York City and all of that. And yet I cannot think that I know New York City. I think New York City, in my mind, and I can't even write about it, I have to make up places. New York City is a lot of small neighborhoods, and they're all different.
Yep.
Different classes of people, and they're all different. And I was in the Bronx. I went back with some friends at one time to visit the apartment I was raised in, which was fascinating as all Puerto Rican now. And long story short, we happened to meet on the street the people who lived in that apartment, which was very strange. And she took us, took us in, and I took pictures of it and all. But I don't know it now. It's different. I mean, I know they're walking around with boom boxes because I was there, but it's small neighborhoods. And the question I was going to ask when I came tonight, I've come before to Earl's programs and they're great, was if you want to write something that's like a cozy in New York, how the heck do you do that? I thought about it many times. I've written other kinds of stuff, but it seems like having been and raised in New York and knowing the schools and knowing so much about it, I can't do that. I could do it in a fantasy world, but I can't do it in New York.
Well, that's
I'm throwing it out. I mean, how would I write a cozy in New York? I should be able to.
well, it would depend. I mean, you could write a cozy that takes place in New York in
One of these little neighborhoods, or
one of the little
Sure.
or a senior building. That's a possibility.
I can think of several neighborhoods. I know I also did a number of historicals in various periods of New York. And I could see writing a story, let's say, that takes place in the Bronx, in one of these little enclaves, or in the Hasidic enclave of Brooklyn,
right?
which is very much, an enclosed community. There are a lot of these little enclaves.
Right, right.
And I was just looking at something on the news, and it turns out there was an accident in a neighborhood in Queens. And I looked at it and I said, oh my goodness, I grew up there.
Oh, wow. Right.
So Queens is another place, some of the outer boroughs. New York is a big sprawling place. Los Angeles, I have only been to Los Angeles very briefly, but I've read a lot of the stories set in these neighborhoods in Los Angeles, and they are little enclaves, and I can see San Francisco is another one. And for all I know, I'm not familiar with Philadelphia and Boston, but I do know that there are these little enclaves, some of them are immigrant communities, and you could set a cozy there. Sure.
Okay. Charles?
Just so you know, Roberta, Philadelphia is a city of neighborhoods. There's like 127 different neighborhoods here in Philadelphia.
I wouldn't be at all surprised.
I think to answer your question, you have to look at the elements of a cozy mystery. Number one, you have a dead body off screen, off the page, right? You don't have any graphic violence in a novel, in a cozy mystery. You don't have any sex, or just it's implied on the page. And there's no really foul language. So if you take those three elements, you could put your writing, your story anywhere you want, and it would be a cozy mystery. Now, I think to answer your question, you have to say something like, well, is something like that, is that something that would happen in this neighborhood in New York City? So if you can answer yes to that, well then yeah, you can go ahead and write your cozy mystery, as long as it has those three elements, at least those three. So I would say, yeah, I would answer yes, you can. You can put a cozy mystery anywhere you want.
I would agree with that. And I would also suggest that there are possibilities of not having to visit the place, because if you're doing a city on another planet, of course, you're creating that. If you're doing a city that does not exist, you're drawing from your experiences with perhaps various cities and compiling this city. And again, most cities are neighborhoods. I know in the noir collections from Akashic, they take stories from various neighborhoods. And when they were doing Buffalo Noir, they wanted one story from a selection of the 20 different neighborhoods that they listed.
Oh,
And, I wrote one that was set in the Allentown area, and someone else did as well. And they said, can you change the location? And I don't know I don't know who the other author was. So, but the other author did, because I said, I don't think so, because the spots I'm describing here, this is a very specific neighborhood. And so I guess the other author changed. And so you can do that because you have lots of particular neighborhoods. Now, I don't live in Allentown. I lived near it, and it's really a short drive away at this point. Buffalo is one of those great cities where you can get anywhere in 20, 25 minutes. But that said, I can look at Bram Stoker's Dracula, one of my favorite books. And I did mention the idea of London as a city teeming with millions that would be ideal for Vlad Dracula's crimes. However, Bram Stoker had wonderful descriptions of London. He lived there, but he also had wonderful descriptions of Transylvania and places he'd never been. What he did was he used the documentation at his disposal. For example, railway schedules. The trains that are portrayed in Dracula, he has them following the railway schedules that were there at the time. Since Dracula is one of my favorite books, and I also, I bounce back and forth between crime on the page and crime on the stage, I wrote a play called Dracula's Guest, or not Dracula's Guest, sorry, that was the first chapter of Dracula, cut out and later published as a short story. I wrote a play called Stoker's Guest. Stoker came to, or a play rather, about how he came to write Dracula. And I did for Whitby what Stoker did for Transylvania. I've never been to Whitby. We went to a North Sea town on our trip this time, but we didn't get to Whitby. It was too far away. But when I wrote this,
England, UK, right? Whitby in the UK?
yes, it's
Yeah.
on North Sea.
Yeah.
And when I decided to write this play, because the idea had been swirling in my head for a couple of years, I went on Google Earth and I walked through Whitby and I read everything I could about Whitby. And after I wrote the play and gave it to my better half and my first reader, she said, "How did you know so much about Whitby?" I said, "I walked through it." Well, when I wasn't there, it was on Google Earth. And since that time, we've gotten an Oculus Quest, or it's now a Meta Quest, the virtual reality system, and you can go anywhere in the world with that. So you can, my mother-in-law who has dementia, I've sat her down and I put her in the main square of San Pedro de Macorís, the town in the Dominican Republic where she was born. And I put her in a swivel chair so I could turn her around and she could see all around and see everything that's there. Because you can kind of do research for that. You don't necessarily get the flavor, the smells, and other things that come with a particular place. But you can do some serious research with technology. And I do want to say one thing, Charles, about the bit in Philadelphia where the car's going down the wrong way street. If I were setting a story in the Dominican Republic where we've been, because that's where my better half's family comes from, I can say that my Spanish is not good, but I know enough to know that una via means one way. Why are there 6 cars pointing at us the other way, beeping horns, so we're the ones who have to back up? Because there are peccadillos that go with all these cities. Now, a person will know the peccadillos of the city he lives in. He'll know all the little twists and turns, but sometimes you can learn either through some experience or through some technology, some of the twists and turns of the others.
Mhm.
Thank you, Gary.
Welcome. Anyone else? Well, let me offer, go ahead.
Oh, hi. Yeah, so I have a question.
Yes.
Because I do historical, also in the 70s, and some of it, like, yes, you want to make sure that your landmarks are, your major landmarks are correct. But for the, when you get into the weeds of the, the luncheonettes and, the bank on the corner, you want to have the ability to be inaccurate to serve your story. So I was just curious how you deal with that. I deal with it by changing the name of, different locations just because it's fiction.
Yeah, I think that's fine. You have the license to do that as a fiction writer. I do like to use actual places, and in Buffalo, when I've said things in restaurants and other parts of the city, and I have some friends who they're Vietnamese born, and they have a food truck. And they want to get a restaurant at one point called Middle Sister Sandwiches, and they serve banh mi. Well, I've used them to their delight in the stories, but you also want some flexibility. I mean, the very first mystery in my series, I set a scene at a bar owned by one of my high school classmates. And right after the book came out, she retired, because we're all old enough to retire at this point, and sold the place. So it's not there anymore. And then another of our favorite restaurants, we went and I gave the owner pages that I wanted to put in the book, and she was thrilled. Then a few months later, they were closed. I don't know what happened to the business. So I've been told maybe putting them in the stories a kiss.
Yeah.
But you fictionalize, certainly. And we use the Anchor Bar in the first book too. And that's the nominal home of the chicken wing.
Oh, Anchor Bar, sure. Frank's, yeah, Frank's hot sauce.
The chicken wing. And I say nominal because there were a couple different places in my neighborhood when I was growing up in the inner city that had chicken wings that were not the same as the Anchor Bars later, but the Anchor Bar did well with it. Well, I set the opening scene in my first mystery novel there. And
did you call it the Anchor Bar, Gary? Did you call it the Anchor Bar?
I did call it the Anchor Bar.
Okay.
And generally people like it when you advertise their business.
Mm-hmm.
The strange thing is, a few months after the book was published, there was a shooting, a fatality at the Anchor Bar. One of the people who worked there at the time shot somebody else, and nobody said anything about my book having anything to do with that, but
that makes it infamous. Can I try and answer to Melanie's question?
Sure.
I think you have to use a mix of true things and then fictional things. For instance, the building that my detective has his office in is a 33-story building. I worked in there for 10 years, and I try to represent it. The hallways, the offices, the windows. I try to portray that as factually as I can. But I gave it a 3-story underground garage, which doesn't exist. So you're not writing nonfiction here. You're writing fiction. And do things take place in the garage? You bet they do. I was talking about bars and restaurants. I have a number of different bars in my story, and some of them are real and some of them are imaginary. So I think you have to, you're able to have a little license in how much you can put into your city that you're writing about.
Oh,
Also,
just to answer your question about Wildwood, because I happened to drive through it 2 weeks ago, a lot has changed and a lot has not changed in 30 years.
Yeah.
I can tell you that.
The beach.
I can tell you one thing. Like I said, I also write historicals, and I wrote 3 novels set in New York City in 1870. And I depended a lot on research for that. I needed old maps, and it depends on how far back in history you're going and how much you have to give the flavor of a particular time and place. And I used a lot of places which, because New York is always unbuilding, no longer exist or have changed their names or have been superseded by something else. And this was more to give the flavor of what was going on in New York City at that very specific time. I mean, there is always somebody, especially if you're doing a historical that is set back far enough, there's always somebody who knows more than you do, and they will call you on it.
Yes, they will. Thomas, you had your hand up.
Yeah, my second mystery was set in New Orleans on Bourbon Street, and I had been there several times. So I was concerned whether I should use the name of the real bars or not. And one of the things I did was to write to the 4 bars that I was focusing on and ask them for permission. Well, what do you think happened?
No, you didn't get it.
Nobody gave it.
Right.
And the reason would be they would wait for me to put the name in and then come after me. So I changed the names of all of them, but anybody who's been to New Orleans would recognize by my description where they were. But you have to be, you know, reasonably accurate with what you're doing.
Right, and if I would suggest that if you put a name in and you didn't have something horrible happen there, because in that first chapter of my first mystery, the anchor bar was a scene, a tense standoff, but nobody got hurt or anything like that. And I mean, if I had had something terrible, or I had said that the bar was connected to organized crime or something like that, that probably would be actionable. But if you have somebody stop in at Joe's place for a drink, there's probably not anything that can be done to you legally because you haven't defamed them in any way. So I think the fictitious places are certainly, you know, what was it in the first book? I had a body dump in what is called Silo City. Now they're rehabbing the old grain elevators down by the river, and they've been under rehab for a long time. And that book came out in 2017, and and I went out there because I was doing research, and I saw broken windows on the bottom tier of the grain elevators, and they were abandoned. And I thought, huh, if I were going to dispose of a body, and a guy comes out and says, "May I help you?" I said, "Yeah, I'm just curious what happens here. Has anybody ever been found dead in these, you know?" They said, "Well, occasionally we get a smell of something that is organic mixed with rotted cornflakes from the grain elevator." I said, "And the police come out, and usually it's an animal or something like that." And I thought, okay, this place works because the windows are broken. Buffalo gets a fair amount of snow. And so I waited, and this body was discovered like 2 books later. So,
Why haven't they found Jimmy Hoffa?
He's under a stadium parking lot or something. So I don't know.
Well, they found Richard III under a parking lot.
We went to Sidley Castle. We were in England, and they were talking about the tour guide who, like many not fully employed actors, was acting out parts, doing bits of history, and talked about finding Richard under a car park, which I was an English professor. So yeah, I knew that. That was a lot of fun. So, okay.
But Thomas, asking permission is probably a good way to go, because I have my detective, he likes to drink rye whiskey and Miller High Life. Well, I had a specific kind of rye I wanted him to drink. And when I wrote the company, they said, "No, please do not use our name." Miller High Life, on the other hand, says, "Your detective shows good taste," you know, so that's how it is now. It's a rye and Miller High Life.
I had the same thing with my first novel. My detective drinks Jameson's.
Yeah.
publisher came in and struck it out. So now I have to just say Irish whiskey, but
Mhm.
I published the third one on Amazon. I went back to Jameson's and let the chips fall where they may.
Well, I can't imagine somebody is, I mean, unless you say it was rot gut and it was destroying him,
Right.
because you have detectives, they drive cars, you know, and their cars are used for whatever reason. And you describe cars. I have people driving all kinds of different cars. Nobody ever says anything like, don't use our car brand. I would think they'd be happy for a little bit of attention.
I agree.
Okay. Well, let's look at the possibility of, I know some of you probably remember the very old TV show that my dad used to watch, and he watched crime shows, and I'd curl up on his lap. The Naked City has 8 million stories. This has been one of them, or something like that.
Yeah.
What about the idea of the city having a personality and
They
having
do.
personality come through as almost as a character in the story?
Cities do.
Yeah.
Communities do.
Yes.
How do you define a personality?
Sometimes it's just a generalization. I mean, you say New York and people think of hustling and busy and too busy to do anything and organized crime. You talk about Chicago and people think Al Capone. They don't mean, the Chicago people don't like it, but that's the vibe.
Yeah.
And there are certain authors who are absolutely linked to certain cities, Dashiell Hammett and San Francisco.
Absolutely. And speaking of that, we'll go back. Let's talk about Dashiell Hammett in San Francisco, because John's Grill in the last chapter of the Maltese Falcon, and I've been there.
Oh, bye.
John's Grill is mentioned in the Maltese Falcon, and they call themselves the home of the Maltese Falcon. They have a Falcon room upstairs where you can have private meetings. They have a replica of the Falcon from the movies.
Mhm.
Their glasses all say home of the Maltese Falcon. And we were, Tammy and her mom and I and her son were dining there, but it's when he lived in California. We were dining there once. I said, "This is great." I said to the server, "Do you sell these glasses?" He said, "No, we don't." And I pulled out my MWA membership card and said, "I'm a mystery writer. I'm a retired English professor. I've taught this book. He said, "Take them." "What? Take them." "Okay." You don't have to tell me 3 times. I'll take them.
Yeah.
So,
I had a very similar experience, Gary. I just dumbed into John's Grill when my wife and I were in San Francisco a couple years ago. And we walked in, we went to a seafood place one night, and the next night we went around the corner to John's Grill. And I walked in and we were sitting back by the bar, and I asked the waiter, "How come there's a picture of Dashiell Hammett above the bar?" And the guy points to the end of the bar and goes, "Well, he used to sit right there. And he used to eat his meal in the back there." And it was like, "You're kidding me." And he goes, "Oh no, if you're a Dashiell Hammett fan, you should go upstairs and see the Maltese Falcon room." And it was like, it was wonderful. I mean, for a guy who's a huge fan of the guy, I was just in my glory, and I had to go sit in his seat. I had to go sit, in his booth where he used to eat. So yeah, I mean, and there's even a little street. It's on the side of a hill called Dashiell Hammett Way, and you can walk up or drive. I wouldn't consider driving up, but you can walk up and down that street. So, do cities have personalities? To answer your question, every city has a personality, but portraying it properly on the page can be problematic, because it starts sounding like you're preaching about how great your city is. And you're probably trying to do almost the opposite. I've written about Philadelphia, told about, you know, the great vistas that you have here and the civic associations that you have, but you also have crime and corruption and racism, and the feedback I got was, oh, you're saying too much good stuff about Philadelphia. And it's like, no, I tried to balance it. I try to balance, you know, it is a beautiful place to live, but it's a crappy place to live in some regards too. So it's a tightrope that you have to walk if you want to try to portray that character, those characteristics in your stories.
I think almost all cities are have a multiple personality, if not disorder, at least a multiple personality vibe. Buffalo, for example, used to be a heavily industrial city. A lot of the factories closed. My sister and my late brother-in-law worked for American Axle. And when that closed, he was old enough to retire and she wasn't, so she had to get another job. And you find that there's the industrial side of Buffalo, but Buffalo also has 17 colleges and universities. And the largest industry in Buffalo right now is higher education. So that's worth reflecting as well. And then the accuracy of other things in the city. I'm friends with the mayor of Buffalo, and when the first book was going to be published, I mentioned that I was making a woman the mayor of Buffalo. His name is Byron Brown, and her name is Ophelia Green. Can I have a governor? I said, okay, I'll make a reference to Governor Brown, which I did. But I have a scene in the office of the mayor in City Hall, which describes the office of the mayor in City Hall with the plaques, awards, etc., belonging to Ophelia Green instead of my friend Byron. So, and that really doesn't matter to people outside of Buffalo, but people who've been in the office, and a lot have, will say, oh yeah, I was in that office. And I mean, that's one of those things that there's a certain verisimilitude that you're trying to get to make the city seem real, even in its contradictions. So,
Any place that you go,
yes.
describe.
Can I ask Nev a question, please?
Sure.
Nev,
Go ahead.
tell us about Bombay. How did you portray Bombay in your stories?
Yes, so the trouble is that the Bombay that I portray doesn't exist. It's 1893.
Well, it did at one time.
It did indeed. So there are neighborhoods that are a little frozen in time. And then there's Pune that I grew up in and neighborhoods there. And so some of it is real. Like if you go into Malabar Hill, there is a three-way crossroads that's called Teen Batti, which means three lights. There is a lamppost there with three lights. So there's some verisimilitude. Then there's also a lot of looking at maps and saying, how long does it take to ride a horse from Malabar Hill to the Rajabai Tower? And then I have to think, okay, a horse can go this speed. And nobody's going to ride a horse and check it out. So as long as it's close, I think it's fine. But
Right.
then I've never been to Karachi, and Karachi has a distinct vibe. If you look at a map, the streets are curved. New York, the streets are in a grid. Karachi, they're curved. And they're curved around wells and big monuments. So I use that, the maps of places. Karachi's in Pakistan. If I had gone to Karachi and Pakistan at the time that I had an opportunity to, I would never have gotten a visa to come to the US. Just FYI. So I did go to Pakistan, and therefore I could get my student visa to come to US, to the States. But I had a question about what color is the mud, the ground in Karachi. And I had this vision that, oh, it's probably reddish. And so I asked somebody who grew up and it used to get dirty. And I said, well, when you were 5 years old or 10 years old, what color was the mud? And they said,
Things people ask.
Yeah, the things that's not available on the internet. That's information you cannot Google. So yeah, it was reddish, and I seem to have worked it out. But there's places I have not been that I've had to create. But since it's the past, I kind of get away with it a little bit. But each place in Murano, Bombay, Captain Jim makes like 5 journeys, and I think I've been to 4 out of 5 places. But some of them are recreated from my childhood.
I just asked Microsoft's AI search engine, what color is the mud in Karachi? And they said, I'm sorry, but I couldn't find any information about the color of mud in Karachi. But then he goes on and tell you all about Karachi, you know.
Well, somebody's got to use Google Earth and go, and you can just walk around and see what it looks like in a rural area and see if that shows up. And you might also look at something, some necessary geological survey, because if the mud is red, that probably reflects a fairly high iron content. So that might give you that as well. Lisa, you raised it. There you are. The picture's moving around, so I'm sorry if my head looks like a bobblehead.
Well, again, I don't know. You probably all know this. I mean, I'm not a fiction writer. I'm a historian. So the source that I use, or the sources that I use very, very often, if I want to get a sense of what it's like to walk through a city that I've never been, which is a lot of the places I write about, is guidebooks. And the guidebook literature from the in the 19th and 20th century is wonderful, you know, and literally tells you what people have had for breakfast. So again, I assume you all know this, but it actually does go back pretty far. There are guidebooks available from the 16th and 17th century. So if you ever decide that you want to move even far back in time, you can get a lot of that material. And because it was designed for people, you know, it tells you things like how to get a guide, how much you pay your guide, whether you want your guide to be like walking behind you as befits a servant, or whether you want them to walk next to you so that they can explain things. So I use that a great deal in my own research.
Another thing for research, depending on where you are, is newspapers on microfiche, because that'll give you a sense. I used to take my research students to the public library and have them fill up all the microfiche readers, and they'd have to look things up. What happened the day you were born? Now go 50 or 100 or 150 years back. What happened on your birthday 100 years before you were born? And that became a fascinating assignment that made them late for other classes because they didn't want to leave the microfiche reader. So that gives a lot of information. And also at the public library, old phone books. You know, I had a scene in a story many years ago, set in the late 50s at the Busy Bee soda fountain. And I had a vague memory of going to the Busy Bee with my mother when I was 6 or 7 years old, thinking, was there a Busy Bee? And I went in, found phone books, and flipped back to 1957 or 58, looked up Busy Bee, and lo and behold, it was there. So my memory was okay, but I was unsure until I found that source, so I could include it in that story. So those are resources too, because cities, to get complex, they have histories, and you can access that. Roberta?
I just found this. Can you?
I can't.
This is the Writer's Guide to Places. It was written by Don Pruse and Jack Heffron. It's a little out of date because it's 2003, but a lot of it still works. And it covers just about every major and a few smaller places in North America, I'd say, because it deals with both the United States and Canada. And like I said, it's about 20 years off, but it still works. And I found it really useful. It was put out by Writer's Digest.
Okay. Okay, that's a good resource. Thank you. And we talked about if you're saying cities in North America, we're 90 miles from Toronto here in Buffalo. And Buffalo has a population of almost 1 million in the metro area. Toronto, by contrast, has a population of 3 or 4 million in the city, and then another 3 or 4 million in the metro area. So it's a much denser area, but also it has a much different character from Buffalo. So every time you go from one city to another, maybe tune in to what those differences are. I mean, Boston has a completely different feel from New York, which has a completely different feel from Chicago, which has a completely different feel from Los Angeles. You know, we were driving in Beverly Hills and everything was totally different. I'm driving the car, and it's like, oh, there's the Nakatomi Tower. Keep your eyes on the road, honey. But it's the Nakatomi Tower. Keep your eyes on the road, honey. So those things. So be attuned, maybe, to the city that you're doing, because, you know, if you have, how many of you have lots of cousins? I have dozens of cousins. We have a really huge family, and most of my cousins are like siblings. And everyone is completely different from all the others.
Right.
Everyone is dramatically different from all the others. So I guess cities are kind of the same way. Tammy's son just moved to Denver. We're going there in a few weeks. We have a grandchild there. So I've been to Denver, but it was with a different wife and a different circumstance. I'm looking forward to seeing it through new eyes. I haven't been there in 30 plus years. Charles?
You talk about differences in cities. I know I've read studies about the differences between Boston and Philadelphia. And a lot of it has to do with who formed the city. So in other words, Boston was formed by the Puritans, where profit was not a 4-letter word. Whereas in Philadelphia was formed by William Penn and the Quakers, and they did not want to be self-aggrandizing. They thought profit was something other people did. So the tones of the city go back that far. And if you want to know about New York City, why New York City is such a, you know, like the capital of the Western world, you have to go back to like the Erie Canal. You know about the Erie Canal, that when they built the Erie Canal, it opened up the West to the ports in, guess where? New York City. So in
New York.
So in 1825,
Yeah.
the whole construct of the United States changed from Philadelphia or Washington, D.C. to New York City. Before that, New York City was just a bunch of swampy lands down by the rivers. And from that point on, from 1825 on, it was gangbusters. And that gave New York that hustle mentality that Roberta was talking about.
And the thing that happened in terms of my city, Buffalo, where I was born, is at that time, Buffalo was the terminus of the Erie Canal. And we have Canal Side, which is a large tourist attraction on the water.
The eastern or western terminus?
The western terminus.
The western terminus, okay.
Right on the Great Lakes. And so from Midwestern cities, freighters, and I had a great grandfather who worked on those freighters, came and brought grain to Buffalo, where got onto the Erie Canal, and Buffalo became the leading grain export city on the planet because of it. That changed later, but yes.
And those kinds of changes in a city give its character to the city, you know? And so I've always been fascinated why New York became the ascendant city on the East Coast, when, you know, at one time Philadelphia was the center of it was the Keystone State, and Washington was a seat of power, but New York took over after the Erie Canal was built.
New Yorkers would argue we go all the ways back to being a trading center, all the ways back to the Dutch.
Yeah.
But That's another story.
Which certainly could be the basis for an interesting novel or a short story on what happened at a particular time in this particular place.
Yeah.
George?
For crime writers, there's an infrastructure that you could tap into. The courthouse, the jail. In Philadelphia, you've got Eastern State Penitentiary. Still
Right down the street.
the novel I'm working on now takes place, half of it in the old Ohio Penitentiary in downtown Columbus, Ohio, about 6 blocks from the State House, which gives all kinds of interesting possibilities for all kinds of mayhem. It's a 22-acre prison in the middle of downtown.
Okay, and that's right. Wherever you are, there is something that will give you that backdrop that you need. For example, I was in that the prison in Philadelphia that's now open for tours. Am I correct? The one
That's correct.
Yeah, I was there.
Every 100th visitor gets to spend the night.
Yeah.
I was there many years ago for a conference, and it was at Halloween, so we took this.
Oh my God.
No way in hell would I spend the night in that place. I'm sorry.
Again, for any of you who've been there, that's the Quaker influence on Philadelphia. The Quakers designed it and built it, and so everybody kind of like was in solitary confinement for 23 hours a day. They wanted you to be, attuned to yourself. They wanted you in silent prayer for 23 hours a day.
Wow, the roots of Supermax. By contrast, we look at other things. I retired from the University of Buffalo, and in fact, I still live. I can point that way, and the South Campus is there are 3 campuses: downtown, South, and the suburban campus. And the South Campus, near where I live, was at the turn of the 19th to 20th century the debtor's prison for Erie County, where you went if you couldn't pay your debts, which might be an interesting setting for a story, because that was a crime at a different point in time. And so
Victor Hugo covered that. Yeah, he's already covered that. Yeah.
So did Charles Dickens.
Right.
And it has been covered, but again, we're looking at France, we're looking at England, and Americans don't know a lot of American history. And so the debtors' prisons we had then, or the Richardson Complex, which is next to our sister institution, Buffalo State University, was for many years the county insane asylum. And it's only been turned into a fancy hotel after its historicity was verified and sanctioned, and it's become something else. But again, I said I had lots of cousins. One of them spent a fair amount of time there. There are stories that, because cities change, as all life forms change. Change is a major part of life. And the way the city was and how the city is, sometimes that link could be an important and pivotal element for a story.
Gary, can I ask a question to the group? Is it too much of a cliche, or do we see cities as hotbeds of corruption? Is that like one of the ways you view big cities as being corrupt?
I think it's a density of population situation. It doesn't have to be that cities are inherently corrupt. Some people are inherently corrupt, and when they occupy cities, I'll give an example. I was thinking about this. People are pushing things on bullies now, and a couple schools, if they go back into session, have done videos and other things on making bullying everybody's business. Well, I can think of a bully who bothered me when I was in elementary school. He wasn't an inherently evil person, I don't think. He wasn't somebody, he was just somebody who liked to push people around for whatever reason. And finally in 6th grade, and the reason I studied karate later was that I was the victim of superstition. I was left-handed when I was young, and I was forced to be right-handed by superstitious parents and grandparents. So when it came to self-defense in boxing, I couldn't figure it out. Martial arts were ambidextrous, so I could work with that. But in 6th grade, I just took the blows and grabbed him and put him against the fence and beat the hell out of him. He never bothered me again. But again, that's a story. In fact, I even used that in the story at one point. That's a story that wasn't part of the city automatically, but it was part of the human experience.
I thought you were going to say the guy grew up to be mayor or something.
No. Actually, funny thing is, he did grow up to be a truant officer, which was funny. Maggie, was your hand up or?
No.
Okay. We're just about out of time, a couple minutes after 7. Any final thoughts on, and this has been wonderful, so thank you all very much. Any final, Roberta?
One
This
last
is
thing.
what,
I'm sorry.
I hope we do some more of these because this is a great interchange of ideas.
We've been doing those, and
Yeah, and I keep missing them.
Me too. Me too.
well, next will be sleuthing, and we can talk about all the characteristics that go into a good sleuth, and I'm sure we'll have stories and ideas for that. Charles?
Before I go away, I have to tell you, Gary, the next time you're in San Francisco, if you want to go to John's Grill, that's fine. But right around the corner is a hotel called the Marker Hotel. And its rooms and ballrooms are named after characters in the Maltese Falcon. You know, there's the Wonderly room and the Spade room and the ballroom, you know. So I walked in and I said, what's going on here? They go, well, the owners are big fans of Dashiell Hammett. So they named all the places in this hotel that they own after characters in his novels.
That's a great idea. I'm glad people are doing that because I tried to get a project started here many years ago called Twain House, because Mark Twain, the place has been torn down now. I used to live on Delaware Avenue, and when he lived here as a newspaper editor, and I could never get enough support to pull this off. And so that's one of the big regrets. I'm glad somebody is doing stuff like that.
Yeah.
Thank you all. We are, next month is a spotlight, and I don't have the names of the authors in front of me who are going to be discussing their work. Then November, Crime Craft is sleuthing. And I have a couple ideas for the spring, but I don't know whether we're going back to live meetings then or not. I enjoy these, and I can't just hop on a plane and come to live meetings for a couple hours and go back, not on a retiree's income.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm not sure where we're going to go from that point, but the chapter is here for you, and we want to have meaningful experiences. And even if we go to live meetings, I'm going to lobby to continue something like this online.
I think there's room for
Great.
both.
Thank you.
I was at the meeting in New Jersey, and there were over 20 people there. And there's so much to be said for having, as much as this is highly valuable and worthwhile, we need to throw some regional meetings in place.
I like live
Actually,
meetings.
regional meetings.
I like live meetings. I do.
Yeah, you probably know the chapter comprises 6 states.
Right.
And the regional meetings would be great. And I don't know, that's something that I'll talk about with the board when we have a board meeting, if we get to that. Nancy?
Unmute, please. Nancy, unmute, please.
You're muted.
Turn your microphone on, Nancy.
You're muted.
The bottom left of the screen.
Okay,
Okay.
is that better? Do
Yes.
do these wonderful meetings tend to be the first Tuesday of the month?
Yes, yes,
I
unless,
want to carve it out in ink on my calendar. I just love this. It's so wonderful. I live in the middle of nowhere. I mean,
Okay.
literally in Pennsylvania, and it's my link the mystery writers, the New York chapter. So thank you so
Whereabouts,
much for
Nancy?
doing
I'm
this.
in Pennsylvania.
okay, well, you know what? I will bring that up at the board meeting, and the meetings are generally the first Tuesday, unless the first Tuesday turns out to be a holiday. So
Great.
we will put it on your
For
calendar
election day.
next month.
Nancy, where are you located?
I live in Sinking Spring, Pennsylvania. It's near it's where Berks County, Lancaster County, and Lebanon County kind of come together.
Not the middle of nowhere. I know where that is.
Oh, where it's
I
two.
do as well.
Well, that's where my
That's
books
right
take.
down the road. Come on, I'm in Philadelphia.
We're neighbors, Nancy.
Yeah,
Okay, get in touch with me, okay?
I wish I could. And that's something, Gary, if we could have regional meetings, if there could be a Pennsylvania meeting, I'd go to it, and or southeastern Pennsylvania, I'd be there.
Right.
I am nowhere near Philadelphia, though. That's my problem. I'm not, the closest city is Lancaster, and it's a long way to Philadelphia. So
They-
maybe those of us who are kind of.
They have one of the best breweries, one of these boutique breweries in Lancaster, the Lancaster Brewing Company. Best beer
Okay.
in the United States.
Okay, I think you can get in touch with me and maybe we can figure something out and get
That'd be
together.
fine. And I think Thomas wants to be, where are you, Thomas?
I'm in the Bethlehem area.
Okay,
That's close enough.
all right. So that's sounding like Phoenix.
That's northeast of me.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, well, thanks, folks.
Okay, thank
Yeah.
you.
Here.
Folks, have a
Thanks.
good night.
Thanks,
See you
guys.
again soon.
Thank you, Gary.
You're most
Thank
welcome.
you, Gary. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Thank
Thank
you all.
you.
Till next.
Good night.
Bye-bye.
Bye.